members, my lovely colleagues from ECU, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, can I tell you how delighted I am to speak before you this evening, a topic which is very close to my heart because I've done a lot of work in that area. I would also like to begin by thanking the learned judge and the distinguished lawyer for making the task a little simpler for me by their earlier talks, but they've also left a daunting challenge before me, and that is, I should not be repetitive, so I'll do my best to do that. I will, as an inside speaker, focus my presentation on human rights surrounding modern slavery. I'll also take you through some statistical data, something very interesting. And of course, as I progress, I will give you a brief outline of human rights associated with it. And I'll also discuss three very important international instruments that I feel have laid a foundation stone as far as Modern Slavery Act of 2018, the Australian Act, is concerned. Friends, by now, you all must have gauged that modern slavery is a significant topic because the number of people enslaved today is more than ever before in human history. These are very strong words coming from Frederick Douglass, who was born as a slave. He was nominated twice to be the Vice President of the United States of America. He says, "It is important to expose slavery in any country because to expose it is to kill it. It is that monster of darkness to whom the light of truth is death." I think these are very, very strong words because it talks about that exposure aspect, which I'm going to come to in a while. Friends, we have all heard about the concept of corporate social responsibility. Undoubtedly, today's Law Assembly's focus revolves around corporate human rights responsibility. As the learned judge has rightly pointed out, there's nothing really modern about modern slavery. If you really see the word modern, modern would be used to commonly denote something between the present and the past. But if you look at what modern slavery is, it's definitely a misnomer because slavery is as inhuman, as pernicious, and as present as it was ever before. Of course, there are certain international instruments that are there, international protocols that we'll speak about, domestic law that has been in place. But we have to understand that although countries would be signatories to these international conventions, international law applies to nation states and not corporations. And that's why corporations have to come forward and do their bit to make sure that slavery has been eradicated. Let's talk about some statistics. Of course, due to the clandestine nature of the act that we're talking about, it's very difficult to find accurate data, but that's what we have, the best that we can get. 40.3 million people are in modern slavery, out of which 71% females and 29% males. If you would like to know a detailed breakup further, 12 and 21% are boys and girls respectively. That's what we're talking about. Friends, 40.3 million is a big number. It's even more than the population of Australia and New Zealand put together. And a recent report said that if we need to eradicate modern slavery, we'll have to free 10,000 people per day to eradicate slavery by 2030 if you want to meet those sustainable development goals of the UN. And of course, if you have to ask yourself this question as to why are there so many people being enslaved in the construction industry, in the agriculture industry, in the mining industry, and so on and so forth, it's definitely, the answer is very clear. It's because employers benefit from cheap labor, and it's very real that we want to buy cheap products. So somewhere down the line, we definitely are responsible. Take a look at the prevalence of modern slavery across the world, how deeply it is rooted. I would call these nations in red. They are bleeding. The higher shades represent the high level of prevalence in the country, whereas the lighter shades are obviously showing how they've been able to overcome it. Look at countries like Iran, Mongolia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar, Thailand, Central African Republic, and Democratic Republic of Congo. Of course, that country there, the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's an open secret that as we speak today, there are people in bonded labor working in mines there. The United Nations Children Emergency Fund has stated that there are approximately 40,000 children working in mines as we speak today. What are they exporting? The highest exporters of cobalt, copper, diamond, tin, and gold, something that the whole world needs. But that's what's coming in from there. The next slide will give you an overview of the vulnerability of modern slavery across the world. And you will see regions such as Afghanistan, Central African Republic, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And of course, you can see India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all catching up there. The reasons are but obvious. They're about poverty, probably the countries are in conflict zones, and illiteracy, and all those would add up to it. The International Labour Organization defines migrant workers as a vulnerable group, and hence, the very existence of a migrant worker in any company should automatically trigger action. Whether Australia or whether it's overseas, it must ensure that all controls are in place. According to Indonesian government's own records, about 1.9 million Indonesian nationals are abroad on expired visas. That's what I call vulnerable. Very easily exploited. Look at the government response to modern slavery. Again, the shades, the highest one, of course, speaks about the way in which modern slavery has been overcome. And if you look at countries like Netherlands, USA, UK, Belgium, and even Australia to an extent, has taken a lead in curbing modern slavery. In fact, this slide will again tell you about nations that have really done well. Australia happens to be here on the number 11 on this list. So if you take off USA, you will see that most of the nations are they're found in they're from Europe. And if you look at the other part, if you take off North Korea and of course Iran, all those countries were really they're not doing well, all coming in from the African continent, and that's the reality. That's what it is. What are the products at risk of modern slavery? The earlier speakers have briefly described that earlier. It's just a presentation, pictorial presentation for your reference. And we all consume these products. You have them at your home, you have them at your office, you've got them at your streets and places that you see around, and they're all there. I think, and I strongly believe, that people will shun businesses if they know that there is slavery involved in the operations or supply chains of these businesses. But then if my belief is so true, why is it that slavery still exists? The answer is that slavery remains hidden from the view, concealed by complex global supply chains and operations. Until now, there was no obligation on Australian companies to inquire about the existence of slavery in their operations and supply chains. But obviously now the scene is very different. Take a look at Australia's top 5 imported products which are at risk. And of course, as my friend rightly pointed out, electronics happens to be figuring out that number 1. Of course, Australia's enviable position as a country of relative wealth with a long history of trade unionism and high standards of workplace safety has no doubt contributed to the perception that Australia is free from slavery. However, because of multinationalism, globalization, relaxing the trade barriers, this has significantly changed the way in Australian companies operate and the way Australian households consume. I've also spoken about, very briefly, about the causes of slavery. I'm not going into the detail, but these could be some causes of slavery in general. You all must have heard of the movie Slumdog Millionaire, Robert and Danny Boyle's movie, and that's where they've shown there's one scene in the movie where they've shown one child who's blinded, particularly because they wanted this child to beg on streets. And that happens, that's so rampant, that's something that's happening around us, and particularly in the Asia-Pacific region where half of the statistics comes from there. And that's something that is very, very rampant, using children in cane industry, asking them to make garments, so on and so forth. Of course, humanitarian crisis, the tsunami, 2004, the number of children that were homeless and what happened to them. There are so many stories that one can keep narrating. I think the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 4, plays a very, very important role, and that's what I want to begin by talking about. Friends, in 20 weeks from now, on the 10th of December 2019, we will celebrate the 71st anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. An instrument that was undoubtedly, it has laid the foundation stone of rebuilding a shattered world after the World War. Drafted in the wake of wartime atrocities against slave workers, one of its first guarantees under Article 4 is that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in their forms. Of course, the European Convention on the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms added something more to it. They said no one shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labor. These I've listed out a number of cases actually about the two judgments passed by the Supreme Courts of India and Pakistan, and also a judgment passed by the Latin American courts. I'm not going into detail of that because that will take a lot of time. But what I've really concluded from that is that all these cases has emphasized that states' obligation to have laws in place that explicitly punish offenses such as servitude and forced labor, and to carry out full investigation when offenses are reported. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights formed the basis of these legal arguments in all these judgments, and this document still remains as important as ever. One of my earlier speakers has already pointed out this protocol, which Australia is a signatory to. This protocol was signed in 2000, became effective in 2003. It is supplementary to the United Nations Convention on Transnational Organized Crime, and that's the first time that the word trafficking was defined. We did not have, particularly in law, a crime has to be defined before we could attract any kind of penalties to it, and that's for the first time that the word trafficking found a definition which was acceptable to everyone. And I particularly put it in different shades because it talks about three important elements: the element of act, the element of means, and the element of purpose. So trafficking in persons means the act is of course recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of abuse of power, or position of vulnerability, or giving or receiving of payments or benefits. And of course, the purpose is ultimately exploitation. Best way of defining this would be the case of Jose Pereira in 1989. This is the case where he moved from North Brazil to South Brazil in search of work. He got employed in a particular estate. He worked there for some days, and very soon he found out that the work conditions were serf-like. He was treated very badly, and he wanted to move out of that condition, but he could not. He could not move out of it, and once when he tried to, with one of his friends, he tried to escape. His friend was shot dead, and Jose was also shot in the hand, and in his hand, and he played dead for a few hours before somebody could take him to the hospital, and that's really where he revealed his story, and that's how the entire thing opened up as far as that estate was concerned. Friends, Australia is heavily obligated under international law to take actions that eradicate situations like Jose globally. Supply chain transparency is the next step in ensuring that this obligation is met. I would also like to finally talk about United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights, because here again, these principles happen to be very, very important, particularly because it is for the first time that a set of guiding principles provided by the first global standard for preventing and addressing the risk of adverse impacts on human rights linked to business activity and continue to provide the international accepted framework for enhancing standards and practice regarding businesses and human rights. This is for the first time that something has happened in 2011, where this United Nations endorsed document, also called as the Rocky Framework, comes after the name of the person who brought it, and he was a special representative of the Secretary General, John Rocky, and of course, a professor from the Harvard University has given out, there's a lot of history attached to this document, but again, not getting into those details. Talks about 31 principles and 3 very important pillars. The first pillar being the state's duty to protect human rights. Now here the state becomes important because the state's duty it is to protect the human rights. And how would the state do that? The state would do it through regulations, policy making, investigations, and of course enforcement. This particular pillar reaffirms states' existing obligation under the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second very important pillar is the pillar of respect. It's the corporate responsibility to respect human rights. So after states' responsibility of protection, we've come to the corporation's responsibility to respect human rights. And how would they do that? Businesses must act with due diligence to avoid infringements of rights, particularly human rights that we're talking about, and that's where the state would come, that's where the corporations would come into this. And when you look at that last pillar, it's a very, very important pillar, and that's the remedy pillar. And that is where the state and the corporations both have to work together. You know, we've always been talking about the 3P and the 3R approach when we talk about human rights. We talk about protection, prosecution, and prevention. But we really not talk much about the 3R approach, which is the rescue, rehabilitation, and reintegration, which really becomes very important from the victim's point of view. That's where the remedy part comes in, where the third pillar addresses both the state's responsibility to provide access to remedy through judicial, administrative, and legislative means, and of course the corporate responsibility to prevent, remediate, and all kinds of infringements that they have contributed to. My final thoughts, I'd like to say that modern slavery definitely exists. I'm very positive and optimistic about this legislation, although I do understand that it's also known sometimes as a legislation, it's like a toothless tiger or a paper tiger as you call it, because there's no enforcement mechanism, and that's why I put that enforcement regime point. I also very strongly feel that governments, that is nation states and corporations, have to work together. Only then can this evil be eradicated completely. Spreading awareness is a very, very important way in which consumer boycott could take place, and so many other means in which, as the lawyer rightly pointed out, the president said that the pressure tactics definitely works in place well. It is very important to have enforceability regime. That should happen. That's really important, I feel, because if that kind of regime doesn't exist, it's very difficult to bring everybody to the book. But that's how international law is. It has persuasive value. Because of the principle of state sovereignty, it's very difficult to bring in that regime. And of course, my last point that I have put in there is triggering Article 7 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in motion, because slavery comes under trafficking, which comes under crimes against humanity, which is the fourth crime, the third crime that International Criminal Court has jurisdiction to look into. And unfortunately, so far, not a single case has been brought before. I understand that modern slavery is a little different from enslavement and trafficking that we're talking about here. But it's very important that, at least one case should be brought in before the court, and that will really see the light of the day. As I conclude, I would like to emphasize that with millions of people estimated to be in slavery worldwide, it is definitely very clear that there's much to be done. 70 years on, human rights declaration still remains as relevant as ever. Thank you.